Hopefully I'm on. Yeah, I'm on. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming in the rain. Didn't know if I was going to make it all the way from Liverpool, so thanks. It's great to be here as part of the Football Writing Festival. I'm Harriet. I'm part of the transfer team at Sky Sports, and what an interesting time to be talking about transfers. It was £2.3 billion spent by Premier League clubs in the summer, breaking the record only from the summer before. And so many interesting points we're going to get into today. But I don't think I'm going to be having to do much of the talking with this panel that I've got alongside me today. I'll introduce them quickly. David Ornstein, of course, the Athletics football correspondent, one of the country's most trusted sources when it comes to transfers. I've got Sam Lee at the end, the Man City football correspondent for the Athletic in his 9th season, covering the club. And in the middle, we've got Shamoon Hafez, the broadcast digital journalist at the BBC for over a decade. You didn't want me to say that, did you? It makes it sound like you've...
I mean, they kept calling me a veteran for some reason. I'm going to have a word with them about it.
Doesn't
legend, more like.
Yeah, legend, more like. So just wanted to start off with a bit of an icebreaker and ask you guys what your favourite transfer so far in your career has been to report on. And Sam, I know you already had one in when we were chatting in the room, so you can go first.
Okay, yeah. Firstly, he is the most trusted. He's not just the most trusted in the UK, he's the most trusted in the world, isn't he? Like David Ornstein he's the guy. So it wasn't my favourite at the time. It was probably the most stressful at the time. But then the satisfaction that you get afterwards, it'll be when Grealish signed for City and that whole process. Because we'll probably go into some of the ins and outs of it later on in terms of the nuts and bolts of a transfer story. But if you're lucky, you can be absolutely certain of the info. And you know that whatever you're reporting is 100% right. But you also know that you're at the mercy of change of hearts, another club coming in, whatever. And the issue I had with Grealish was the Aston Villa fans did not want to accept it one bit. And they kind of mobilised online. They were very unhappy about it. Even me suggesting that he might want to go, they thought that was calling, I think, the manager at the time, a liar. Dean Smith, they were saying, Dean Smith says you want to say, so you're calling him a liar. It was very stressful. Even to this point where the move was agreed, and I remember you did a lot of the reporting on that. Villa didn't want to deal with City, so even when City had triggered that 100 million clause, they were looking around trying to sell him somewhere else. He ended up having to go back to training, and that's when the odds had changed, and it was Jack Grealish is more likely to sign a new contract at Villa than go to City. And I was like, I'm pretty sure this isn't true, but this is all going on, and the Villa fans are so happy. There was if we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of like Twitter insiders, there was a guy that nobody had heard of, and he said, he's actually really good for NFL in America. He gets on really well with the owner of the club that Randy Lerner owns, the team that Randy Lerner owns, and he says that Grealish is staying, and you start thinking, oh my God, what's going on? We had an Athletic dinner, and unfortunately I had a phone call with somebody that night, and he'd spoken to Grealish that day, and he said, no, he's still desperate to do it. And I thought, well, that's good. But the next morning, I don't know if I should admit this, so I either cried or I was close to crying. I said to my wife, this needs to happen. Because I know that Grealish is desperate to join City. I know that they've bid that buyout clause. I know all the background about what the club have done. And I thought, this needs to happen. And then I think it was with a Wednesday night, he's travelling up to Manchester, everyone knew. Thursday was fine. We drove down we got the train to London for another Athletic party, actually.
We have a lot of parties.
Yeah. And I wrote 3,000 words on the train about Grealish, how he's going to fit in. Everything was all done. Got to this party, free bar, thought, I'll have a good night tonight. But I was just so stressed. And they were like, the drinks are up until 8 or whatever, but you could go and ask for 2 bottles of wine, and they'd give them to you. So I was enjoying it, and I was pretty drunk, and I thought, well, this has been agreed now, it's been announced officially by the club, all my work's up, job done. And then Alex, our boss, comes over, marching over while I'm at the bar, probably with 2 bottles of wine in hand, and he goes, Lionel Messi's leaving Barcelona. He goes, what do you know about City? I was like, are you joking? I was like, I've not got the physical capacity to deal with this right now. But fortunately, I was able to find out that they weren't going to do it, but that Grealish story, we'll come back to it, but it took a toll. It was difficult. And it was more difficult because it's almost, the more you know, the trickier it is. Drinking
your way through transfer reporting, that's what we all do.
Just the last night.
Sham, come to you.
I think, I don't know if you two agree, but it's fills you with dread, doesn't it? The transfer window. And speaking to people, as you said, you've got all the information, but when you send the email out to the wider department and then tweet the story out when it goes live, you're sort of waiting on your phone for someone to message you going, no, this is wrong.
Yeah.
But when actually your sources are sort of people you trust that are reliable, and you've done all the background info checks on the story. And yeah, it's probably the most stressful. And the journalists I speak to that in the office and in the wider industry are saying, this is the most stressful period of what we do. And just once the window's shut, we can get on with our lives and wait until January for the next one to come.
David?
Well, it's pretty much the only thing I do, so it does stress you out, but without it, I'd probably be irrelevant. I was going to say been privileged, but it's aged me massively to have done pretty much every window, first at the BBC and now with The Athletic, since I turned professional in 2006, every summer and January. So there have been countless transfers, and there are. It's incredible. It's unbelievable how it's expanded into an industry in itself. And I've said on many occasions, you could report on a transfer during a match, and you'd get much more interaction around that transfer than you would about something that's happened in that match, unless they're the very biggest matches. Pretty much any transfer story will dominate. And I don't know if I've messed that up. I remember back to like the January 2011 window when Torres moved from Liverpool to Chelsea, and Andy Carroll was like helicoptered into Merseyside.
Direct replacement.
Yeah,
went so well.
like for like. And there have been big transfer deadline days as well, like when Radamel Falcao signed for Manchester United from Monaco out of the blue, and then Danny Welbeck moved from Manchester United to Arsenal, but it was Tottenham who tried to do the deal on deadline day, and then Arsenal nipped in. And I've got countless stories on ones I've worked on. I've got a memory like a sieve now. We're at this forum and coming to think of it. For all of the big ones teams, I've got ones that I'm really proud of, but because so many happen, and I'm very lucky to report in them, that you don't necessarily, they don't spring to mind straight away. In recent years, a club like Manchester United, Christian Eriksen, moving from Brentford to United, I broke that one, and it was really sort of satisfying because there was a bit of a uncertainty over who would get him. Liverpool, a story that I was very, very pleased with was Ibrahima Konate, because the night before publishing, and this is part of the stress that you go through, certain people at Liverpool were doing everything in their power for it not to come out, and we managed to get it over the line and publish it. Although you still have the anxiety that somebody's going to message you or call you and say it's wrong. You have anxiety right up until the moment you publish that somebody else will do it before you. And we'll come on to speak about this, never at the expense of making your checks and doing your due diligence to make sure it's right. And so, yeah, the list can go on. Like there have been many Arsenal ones that I've done. And Man City, I like the ones out of the blue that haven't sort of been anywhere before. Zinchenko from Man City to Arsenal was a great one, and probably the one that was sort of most enjoyable, or I take fulfillment from, was reminded to me off stage by Sham, because it was my first kind of scoop of proportion, and it was when Robin van Persie moved from Arsenal to Man United, and there'd been a lot of rumours about it and reporting and speculation, and I was speaking to some people that were like, don't get involved in and it taught me lessons for my future actually, because it was in 2012, don't get involved in the running commentary, the daily reporting, because that really irritates us involved in the deal, and it can disrupt the deal. But if you are true to your word on that, we'll come to you at the end and we'll let you know when the deal is done. And pretty much as it was signed in Carrington, a number of people involved got in touch and said, sort of go for it. And like, amazing. And I went to the editor at the BBC at the time, who sort of said, you know, how many independent sources do you have on this? And I was like, well, one, because these were people kind of together. And he said, that's not enough, because we needed at least two independent sources. And I was like, what am I going to do here? Like, I've finally got a story. This is why I'm in the industry, and I can't do anything with it. And someone's going to break it elsewhere. And the two clubs, the press offices, you go and speak to them and hope that they'll confirm it for you. And they weren't answering their phones, which is like a telltale sign that the deal was done and they were going to be announcing it. And one of them at Arsenal did that classic thing where he did answer and went, I'm on a train, I'm on a... and the line just went dead.
Yeah.
So I went over to our editor, Howard Nurse, and I just said to him, put this one on my shoulders. I'm sure it's correct, and I trust the sources that are involved in it. And if it's not, I'll walk out the BBC and say I broke protocol, and that's my career here over. And he said, right, go for it. So I published it, and it was a scoop, but Twitter and things weren't quite as big then. I didn't have as much sort of traction in my stories. And like 10 minutes later, both clubs who were ignoring me announced Robin Van Persie deal has been agreed.
He wasn't on a train anymore. He could
No,
speak
they
to you
weren't.
then.
Abracadabra, but 10-minute victory for my scoop. So yeah, Van Persie 2012.
But you have to cut through a lot of the jargon, don't you, when you're dealing with people. Like when you go to someone, a club officer or a agent or someone, and you say, "Oh, I've heard so and so's happening." Oh, that's what you've heard, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, that. If you want to go with that, then it's up to you. You know.
A lot of manipulation.
Then that's when you have to go with your, convictions and sort of go for it, and sort of publish it. Make sure your sources are correct.
Yeah, well, let's pick that up then. We're going to come on and talk about some of the bigger talking points, but let's talk about the process of actually reporting on a transfer. So David, I'll come to you first in this one because you do get a lot of the exclusive stories. Where do you first hear about these transfers? Is it you actively chasing them, or is it people coming to you and the relationships you develop? How's the timeline kind of go when you know a big transfer's coming like that?
Yeah, great question, Harriet. There's no rules to this. There's no script or process. In terms of writing up the story, it's pretty formulaic when it comes to transfers. But that's kind of the end of the
that's the easy bit.
That's the finishing point. And that will be, what stage the agreement's at, whether there's a medical, contract length, and any background data and stats. But the rest is not formulaic at all. So you'll have trusted people that you've built up connections with over the years, whether it be agents of players themselves, their family members, executives at their clubs, chairmen, owners, staff members, physios, doctors, kit men. It's not a stereotypical thing like the canteen lady. I don't know any canteen ladies, but there is no rhyme or reason to who the source should be or not. And then, there's the official channels, like the head of communications at a club. I remember there was one story breaking in France. This happened a couple of times, actually. The example I'll give you is actually with the same club. It was Arsenal. One Saturday morning in Sweden, there was some Twitter tweets from Swedish accounts saying Arsenal are in for Kim Kallström. And it was early in the morning, and I just got onto it. And I spoke to Arsenal and said, and I was at the BBC at the time, which is a really respected organisation that, by and large, people cooperate with you because of the way you go about doing your thing. And I said, look, this story's out there in Sweden now. Can I check if it's correct? They were like, yeah, it's out there, so I may as well tell you it is correct. And he's having his medical today or something like that. And I broke the story sort of in the UK, and everyone was like, wow, huge story by David Ornstein. I was like, no, credit the Swedish guys. But so sometimes you actually, through the normal channels, it doesn't have to be some kind of huge investigation. And that happened again with Nicola Pepe, which loads of people sort of credited me in the UK for, but it was starting to creep out in France, and I just made a really quick phone call to Arsenal at that time and to Lille. And so part of it is what Sham says, just following the, even though you encounter a lot of politics and manipulation and people making you question yourself because the clubs don't want these things coming out a lot of the time, the official channels are part of the process. But anyway, sorry to digress. So you can pick up the information from anywhere, and I've spent years going to events, to matches, calling people, texting people, going for lunch, coffee, bumping into people randomly. There can be some luck in it. A friend of a friend or a contact suggests somebody else to you. And bit by bit, over a long, long time, there's no magic wand. You're sort of building up this network of contacts, of people who might pick the phone up to you. They might not, and you win some, you lose some. You'll have good moments, you'll have bad moments. You'll have people telling you that, I'm going to save the story for you. When there's something to say, you'll be the first person I go to. And then you see it announced on their website, and you're like, thanks, mate, or somebody, another journalist gets it, and you can't get down with the knocks. You've got to be ready to go again, and always use your initiative. So as you're maybe stumbling across information, or you just think things are going to come to fruition, because Jack Grealish is a transfer that, Sam or the Villa correspondents would have known that this summer he signed a contract extension, but that was almost like to preserve his value. So with months out, you know that Grealish could be a transfer for the next summer, or you know for this January, or maybe more likely next summer, that Arsenal are going to need a striker, and so it's in your head, and that becomes a theme of your conversation with all your contacts, and then you get into the process of, as I sort of explained with Van Persie. Really building the trust and showing your contacts, the people involved, if you're lucky enough that they'll share stuff with you, that you don't abuse it. So you don't go spilling the beans on Twitter or in a podcast and think, it doesn't matter if I just say this here, it won't get picked up anywhere, and then some aggregator goes and picks it up. You've got to be true to your word and show through your actions and your journalism that you're a man to be, or woman to be trusted. And keep in touch with these people all the time. As it develops, there's the deals on, the deals off. It might not happen, it might happen, and consult them all the time. Is it possible to say something now? And they're like, maybe in a couple of weeks, and you come back in a couple of weeks and you're ready. And then the key thing is, by and large, and it's the same rules, the BBC, The Athletic, and many others, you need these multiple sources, because you could be manipulated. An agent could call you up and just say, my player's moving from this club to this club, put it in The Athletic. And you're like, is that even true? And I used to get that at the BBC quite a lot. Some agents, especially from abroad, would ring me up and say, David from the BBC, can you put this out? And then you ring the club in the UK, and they're like, I've never heard of the player. So it's about sort of cross-referencing your information, and the final point I'll make on this, because I don't want to hog the platform, is that a lot of my, and this doesn't just apply for transfer reporting, it's all forms of news reporting, which I do, and the more in-depth stuff that Sam and a lot of our guys at The Athletic and Sham does at the BBC. But my stuff, I almost see it like, when you're watching Line of Duty or one of these crime dramas, and you've got different faces and different sort of lines linking everyone together. And sometimes in football, it should be more like in Line of Duty, to be honest, given some of the ethics and practices. But anyway, so you're constantly mapping out how these contacts can link together and who they worked with previously, and if I speak to him or her, may they be able to introduce me to him, and I understand why they're going for that player now, and I don't know, the medical records can come because he used to be a medic at this club and that club, and then it's like a triangulation process. Like, what's that film?
I can't help you here.
Where there's like numbers and digits everywhere.
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report. It's like that in your head. I don't write enough of this down, but so it's like, it's just an ongoing sort of process of diligence, and then when it comes to the point of publication, or near to publication. You just need to be absolutely firm on your information, have followed your company's process and your own values, and then you're into a corridor of jeopardy. Is it going to get over the line? Is it not? Are you going to lose it? Are you not? Is it right? Is it wrong? And you do lose some, unfortunately. There have been stories that people have talked me out of doing, and then they've been true. People have taught me into doing, and they're not quite right. And keeping your eye on the ball at all times. So I could have gone to bed on June or July or whatever it was at 11:44 p.m. But because I was keeping my eye in, and I knew the Declan Rice transfer was bubbling away and coming to fruition, and so I stayed up. I just sensed something was happening, and you're speaking to enough contacts. You say they're getting closer. They're getting closer. So my wife's plan for get to sleep at 11:30 was like out the window. Be up in a minute, and then I got a call saying the deal's done. And you're straight into action. The problem was the UK arm of The Athletic, everyone had gone to sleep. So luckily, being a US company, we have people in the States. And I was like, somebody help me now. I've got a story. And we had checked it. And one of the things that's tricky, sorry, I'm going on too long, but sometimes the people at the club, the press officers, the people you have to check this stuff, or at least tell them you're doing the story, are behind you. So they don't know that their executives are doing this deal. And an example of that was this summer when I broke the story on Jurrien Timber signing for Arsenal. I went to the club comms, and it's not a disgrace on them by any means. And they were like, "What are you talking about? Like, barely even heard of that player." And I was like, "Yeah, you've made an offer, and it's been rejected." And so on those occasions, you have to rely on the trusting of your source. And they went away and made a check, came back to me and said, I'm not really disputing it, but I can't really help you either. And that was Sham's thing about the courage to go through with it. So yeah, that was just a little bit of insight into this chaotic world. The chaotic description I'm giving you is because the industry and the transfer market and reporting of it is chaos.
No, it's so
Can
interesting.
I add some much less concrete?
Yeah, go for it.
Info? So obviously, there's that goes on as well, all the more kind of official stuff, the phone calls, the trusted people. But do you guys ever get like DMs out of the blue from people? And obviously, you can't just go hot and heavy with that. It might just be a message in the group like, I've heard this. I can't say if I believe it or not, but we need to look into it. I've got 3 examples that spring to mind. 2 were, again, related to Jack Grealish, which was part of the reason I was so confident with it. One of them was a guy, could possibly be here knowing my life, a City fan who's got a hospitality box at the Etihad, and he'd gone in, let's say June, July, to renew it or upgrade it. And the girl who manages his box was saying, they've been so busy sorting out the hospitality boxes for Kevin Grealish, Grealish's dad. So then, first of all, long before anything's been agreed, you think, well, City are obviously making the arrangements for this to happen. So you get the confidence from that, and obviously you go check it out with the more proper sources like David mentioned. And then towards the end, in terms of that 100 million bid being agreed, somebody messaged me. It was a lad, maybe at uni, and he lived with the son of one of the Villa directors. So we got it from him. The City had made this £100 million bid. And also the Villa wanted James Ward-Prowse, which obviously didn't happen, but they did bid for him, didn't they? I think it was that same Friday.
Yep.
So those 2 were pretty legit, but they just come out of nowhere, and obviously you think, what can I do with this? Because I don't know who these guys are. And they could easily be like screenshotting the conversations, and then if I go and do the story and it's wrong, they go, I tricked Sam Lee. So you don't want that. And then the other one, again, very similar, somebody whose father-in-law was one of maybe the chairman at Bournemouth a couple of years ago. And he said, City have agreed a fee for Nathan Ake, which it wasn't a surprise that they wanted him, but that they agreed the fee was a breakthrough. And I think it was the day after City had signed Ferran Torres. And in terms of like communications and stuff, there was a fee being reported in Spain for Torres, but City were like, oh no, it's lower than that, and they were very strict on what that fee would be. So I thought, maybe I'll go to City with this and just say, look, I've heard that Ake's fee's been agreed, it's apparently 40 million, and I know you were very particular about the Torres fee yesterday, So I wanted to make sure the fee's right. And he went, nah, it's not true, mate. Nowhere near being done. Fine, leave it. 5-10 minutes later, a load of London journalists are reporting it. They'd obviously got it from Bournemouth, Southern journalists. And then the same press officer messaged me back 20 minutes after the call saying, it's 40 million plus one in add-ons. And just that. And then that goes into the whole trust kind of things and relationships with clubs, which is for another day, believe me. But sometimes you do just get people messaging you, and maybe they've heard stuff that isn't accurate. But in these 3 cases that I can think of, it was absolutely spot on. And then, but then obviously the risk you've got then is you go to your colleagues and say, "Can we check this out?" And then maybe David will call somebody who does know, and it'll be complete nonsense. And then at least it's not out there in the world. You've not embarrassed yourself. But obviously among colleagues, it's like, where's this guy getting his info? But sometimes you've got to check it out, because if you don't check it out, you just think, if that was true, I should have done something with it.
Did we have one the year before with City, where we had a number of people at City and around City preparing for the signing of someone?
Kane.
Was it Kane?
But that was awkward though, wasn't it? Because at Spurs, the info that you won was a JPB, Jack Pitbrook, nothing was happening at all. But at City, there was a constant. There was really sources like close to a lot of the players, like they're talking about it. De Bruyne had spoken to Kane, things like that. And there was this constant stream of they're preparing the materials for the signing and stuff. But obviously at the Spurs end, they just weren't engaging at all. So that was a kind of, nothing ever got reported. But as far as like what the Spurs guys must have thought of what I was saying, this is never going to happen.
I just want to pick up on that, and I will be really quick. So what Sam's sort of explaining is, like, never rule out a source. It can be the most spurious or random. It could be someone in a hotel or someone's seen someone at a service station.
My estate agent rang me a couple of years ago saying...
Estate agents are amazing.
He said, I was buying a house, and he said, Pogba, the only house, I haven't got loads. He said, Pogba's looking for a house in Manchester. I thought, what do you mean? But it was so unusual, I just thought, well, that can't be anything. But that same night, it was reported that he was going to go to City on a free. But then obviously, talking about information that's right, that was right, wasn't it? That he was going to go to City on a free. But there was so much backlash to it from United fans, he backed out of it. But again, my estate agent rang me. I put it in the United channel, I think, saying he's looking for a house. But none of us knew what it meant. And obviously, I think he sold his house because he thought he was going to leave United. And then he was having to think, I'm going to have to buy another one because I'm going to move to City. So that was another one.
One that springs to mind is when I was at an event a few months back and got speaking to a removals guy. And he said, I'm booked in for this player's house. And,
I've had a couple of these, actually.
Yeah, make sure you're on it, because this guy's followed up on it. It didn't happen because it fell through at the last minute because the loan couldn't get agreed. But it's adding to your list of people who it could be anyone. Social media people that with players who all have got their social media teams now. They are very useful to get in contact with and get snippets of information, but. We're here listening to you, and you're one of the guys who's sort of changed the game of how transfers work. Yourself and the great man Fabrizio Romano. Yeah, is there a bit of friction, or is it quite cordial between you?
Very cordial. Yeah. So it's got great respect for him.
But just how the industry has changed. We sort of used to be stuck on Sky Sports News back in the day. Now it's Twitter, and as you mentioned, the going to bed at quarter to midnight, it's not going to happen because you've sort of dropped a story, then you get sent the message saying, is this true? You've got to spring into action at all hours of the day, ringing people up, going, this has come from Ornstein, is it true? Or, what are your contacts saying about it? Yeah, you have to follow it up at all hours of the day. It's
also become global as well. I think we just kind of focused on the domestic market, and if someone came in from abroad, I remember when we were at the BBC, when I was at the BBC, it was like dealing with it in working hours sort of thing. Yeah. But I got a message really late, a couple of Januaries ago, that Luis Diaz, who had been heavily linked with Tottenham, had decided to join Liverpool. And I was desperate to do the story. it needed a bit of consultation with the athletic editors here in the UK, and it was too late on this occasion. Whereas the Declan Rice one, I just needed someone to bloody publish it, and that's where America came in handy. But with Luis Diaz, I needed to talk it through, and there was no one awake. And so I had to wait until the morning, and really I needed to check with Liverpool and say I'm doing this, because I didn't have it as firm as the Declan Rice story. And Liverpool, it was too late. It was gone 11 o'clock. You can't start calling. It was maybe gone midnight. Can't start calling them up. And and then I woke up, crack of dawn, like 7 a.m., maybe even earlier, 6 a.m., ready to rumble. And overnight in Colombia and Portugal. He was playing in Portugal and he's from Colombia. The journalists there are rampant on their transfer news, like everywhere in the world now. And so you're not just competing and working in your domestic market. There's stuff coming out from all over the world. And one of the two quick points before we hand back to Harriet, the timings of things, when you say staying up late, also getting up early. So my phone rang at like just after 5 a.m. and it was an English person, so there was no time. Well, someone I thought was in England, so there's no time difference, and it was to do with the Harry Kane transfer, and they'd finally got the green light, or given the green light for Kane to go to the airport. And so they were like, Spurs had given him permission, pack your bags, and I'm like still opening my eyes and like pulling the bed cover off. And I'm like, and I was trying to, because it was quite a high-ranking contact, trying to sound like compos mentis, like I was, yeah, absolutely. And I'm like peeling my eyelids back and thinking, I didn't even know where I was. And that's just the nature of the 24/7 industry it is now. It's just a remarkable environment.
Well, you said you can't cope with not being on the tube without Wi-Fi, so we were talking backstage, and you said you've even broken a few stories while you've been on the tube, so you're switching between your Vodafone and EE SIM cards to make sure that at all times, even when you're on the underground, you have access to it. That's what happens in the transfer window, isn't it? It's non-stop. I want to touch on a few different perspectives, but before that, I just want to ask a quick one. Has social media completely changed the way that you interact with transfers? I'll come to you, Sam, because it's interesting from a club perspective. Manchester City, a team that have had so much going on in the last 9 seasons since you've been covering them. But would you still say that transfers are the one thing that really gets the most traction and attention when you report on them?
Yeah, 100%.
Is that frustrating? You put so much work into a really good story, and then all it takes is a transfer.
I don't have any other good stories. No, there's other stuff that frustrates me in terms of what should or shouldn't be talked about, but it's transfers, I get it. To be fair, I can't really complain too much, because whatever reputation I've got was kind of earned over one summer in 2017 of having a succession of good transfer stories, because again, you get into a certain situation where it's like, well, I know this is right, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But that summer there was a lot, and it's kind of built from there. So if I was to sit and complain about transfers now and the impact they have, it'll be a bit rich, because my kind of following jumped quite a lot that summer, and I'd say I'd probably built on that more than on anything else. And in terms of social media changing the impact, I don't know, because David Ornstein's been doing it since 2006, you mentioned. But when like I said, that was 2017, I started doing that. And Twitter's obviously taken off a lot in the last few years. So by that point, it was already...
It's all Twitter, or X as it's now. It's all refreshing Twitter, isn't it? Like,
has it changed from a BBC perspective then, in terms of the live feed and the live reporting and the interaction with social media from that side of things?
Yeah, because Sky Sports News was like the go-to when transfer windows was earlier on, but now Twitter, a lot on Instagram as well. People, players, agents and stuff posting messages. Got to stay across the Instagram stories, which so you got to stay across the social media platforms. I don't know what you feel, where you get a lot of the information from.
Yeah, you don't get sort of proper information from social media.
But change the way you report it more from that perspective, the way you're actually reporting on things, and when you click go on the tweet and everything goes mad, like that interaction with your audience must be completely different.
Just on Sham's point, by the way, keeping an eye on all of the sources is really quite interesting, because you're seeing people now who agents might on their Instagram story or whatever be at an airport and you're like, hang on a sec. And for all of the things that, this is back to the previous conversation, for all of the things that you dismiss and it is absolute rubbish, you'd be surprised at some of the leads that do come to fruition. And that's why you have to explore every one. And some of them, you ring your proper contacts, and they're like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And you're worried because you annoy them. But there are every now and again some of these guys who get in touch with you. It comes to fruition in terms of the reporting. Yeah, like Twitter in particular for me, and people are saying Instagram's bigger and you should use it more, and TikTok and things like that, Twitch, and need to sort of broaden my horizons on social media. But definitely like the way that my stories have propelled, especially since joining The Athletic, which was a niche, or it was a startup, and so Twitter was kind of much bigger than the actual website of The Athletic, and still is in certain circumstances, because it's a subscription website, and Twitter in the most part is free, or X. And so it is a big part of my career and my story and the journey that I've been on. And you've got to understand the responsibility as professional journalists when you're posting this stuff. It's not just, I think I'm hearing this and I'll just put it on there. It's like, you've got to be right now, because people are believing us more than ever. And when you get it wrong, people are coming down on you harder than ever. And with the big followings and the reputations, like Twitter is the gateway. It's allowed me to, and my colleagues and friends, to become known around the world, and for your news to travel like that. And so when we're talking about all these checks and the diligence and the work we put into it to make sure it's right, it's all because for many people, even though it's in the grand scheme of things not that important, it's become like a real part of their life and their enjoyment of football and sport.
Yeah, we've had a 5-minute warning a couple of minutes ago, so I'm going to end with a few quick fire questions. We're going to try and make them quick fire. We have got so much more to get into in the second part. I want to touch on Saudi Arabia and all the emerging markets and other things. But quickly, I've got 3 questions, so I'll come to you on each. Sam, I'll come to you first. Which Premier League club had the best summer transfer window and why?
It's interesting now, because we've had 10 games that we can look at it and judge, but like instinctively you think, Tottenham, but you wouldn't say Tottenham had a good window, I wouldn't have thought. The players like Kane leaving didn't necessarily replace him. Maddison was obviously a good deal. But because they're top of the league, it looked better. I suppose on paper going into the season, you'd probably look at Arsenal just because it seemed like they added real quality and different options. Yeah. I don't think there was a lot of standout business, because Chelsea bought a lot of good players, but I remember looking back at what was said at the end of the summer, and they said, how could they spend so much money and not have a striker? And I still think Chelsea got some good business, and although they spend loads of money and it seemed like it was just pretty scattergun, they were looking and are looking for players who were young, got a certain profile. They're not just buying absolutely everybody. So I don't think Chelsea had the best window, but I would say it was probably better than most would give it credit for.
I think Spurs did probably have one of the better windows.
Yeah, but I think in terms of
quick fire questions.
I know, I was about to say, we've got to move on to a second quick fire question.
I'll just say I'm wrong.
Vicario's, sort of.
Yeah, but I mean, we can judge that now and go, he's done well. But at the end of the summer, you might have looked at it and gone,
Sham, I've got a different question for you. Sorry.
I think Liverpool had a good window as well in rid of.
Again, they were judged. I saw they were judged to have a bad one.
Sorry?
I was looking back at articles for the end of the summer, and people like winners and losers, just to have a look at what the perception was 2 months ago, and people said Liverpool.
Well, that comes on to one of the other quickfire questions. David, I'll come to you, and then Sham, I've got a third one for you. But which recent transfer for you is now looking like the best value?
James Maddison, £40 million from Tottenham. He's been the best attacker, arguably, in the Premier League this season, up there with Salah and a couple of others. I don't know why Manchester United, for example, didn't take him. Great age, great physical, technical, very rarely gets proper injuries, and he's now establishing himself in the England squad. If you look around the league at some of the signings and their values, you cringe when you see James Maddison for 40 million. I think superb.
Yeah, good business. And Sham, the final one then for you. Which club do you think is working in the most innovative way in the transfer market?
Well, having covered Everton quite a bit for the last year or so, they signed sort of 5 players, I think, in the last, it was 5 ones in the last transfer window, and basically Sean Dyche had come out and said that we've got no money, we're going to have to be constructive, we're going to have to manufacture deals because we know the financial situation of the club, the sort of angst that they're in at the moment. So of the 5, Beto came out at 25 million and the striker Shamiti was 15 million. But the only sort of money they spent that they actually had to pay out on was for Danjuma's £3 million loan fee. Now, how they structured the rest was they agreed with the clubs to leave payments until the next financial year, so they don't have to pay anything until April, which doesn't go on the accounts and sort of, you know, manufacturing deals that way. I think that's the reason why they couldn't get Che Adams over the line in the summer, because they'd agreed a £12 million fee, but Southampton wanted more up front. Everton weren't willing to do that, and you know, the sort of negotiations over the price, how much they'd pay up front, they couldn't agree on, and that's why that's when that fell through. So yeah, then there's sort of Burnley as well, who spent a load of money, and did they spend it wisely? You know, it's looking questionable at the moment. But Vincent Kompany's sort of adamant that they'll stay in the Premier League this season. We'll find out. 14 new signings, you know, having to bed them in is sort of a tough task for a manager.
Every club surely aspiring to be Brighton, though, because the way that they find talent and manage to identify that and sell it on for the huge fees. I think every club would like to have a similar scouting model, wouldn't they? Well, that concludes part 1. I feel like we've spoken about a lot, but maybe not go through all the topics. And luckily we have part 2 to go through a load more. And we're also going to have a Q&A, so get thinking about your questions. We're just going to have a short 10-minute break now for you all to get a drink. There's a bar over there as well. And yeah, do whatever else. So 10 minutes and we'll be back in a bit. Right, I'm going to start part 2 with a bit of a quiz question, and feel free to shout out answers if you have an idea. But the current record for a player is 200 million, I believe. That was Neymar, and there's been some projections on what the analysts think the world record transfer fee for a player will be in 2050. So that is, someone do quick maths for me because I'm not very good at that. Something 27 years from now? So what do you think? What do you guys think the world record transfer fee could be for a player in 2050? I have got an answer. It's not just a random guess.
Aren't you meant to script us with these questions so we can prepare before we come here?
700?
700 you're going
700
for?
million? What do you reckon?
I'm really fascinated to know what the projection's going to be. Because I can't work out if it's just going to keep going exponentially or just completely bottom out.
Will we be near the billion mark?
Yeah.
Well, what's
David?
it been in the last 20?
And
So
there'll probably be a Super League by then anyway.
Yeah.
So then,
We're
how
going
much
around
is
the
players
700
moving?
mark over here.
No,
What do you
I
reckon,
don't know.
David? What do you guys think? 700? Higher? Higher? Right, okay, yeah. So there'll be different incentives in there. Yeah, nice. Well, the answer, do you want the answer, David, or are you going to do a guess? You're really thinking hard on this one.
Well, it's like, what's the difference from the late 90s to now?
Yeah, so that's what they've done it on all the trajectory. And inflation, taking into account all those kind of things.
Which would have been like Alan Shearer moving to Newcastle. So, in terms of probably about 400 million.
So they reckon it could reach up to 650 million
Wow.
by 2050, and that's what the analysts have said. And obviously, one of the huge factors that will come into that is these emerging markets. And the one we've seen most recently, Sham, I'll come to you first on this one, is the Saudi Arabian market and how that's really changed how we interact with transfers, particularly in the summer just gone. I guess, do you think that's set to continue? Because if you think back to quite some time ago now in the Chinese league and the way they were buying players, and that looked like it was on an upward trajectory and it slowed down again. Do you think Saudi will follow a similar path, or do you think that's here to stay?
No, I think it's something that football clubs and football supporters are going to have to deal with, that Saudi are probably here to stay, because it's not just a football thing, it's sort of sporting and a nationwide sort of infrastructure as well, that they're trying to diversify, such as the Vision 2030, they're building the new Neom city as well. So they're trying to go away from the oil and make more money from elsewhere. And you know, the MBS, Mohammed bin Salman said, you know, if sports washing is going to bring 1%, it's going to add 1% to my GDP, then I'll continue to do sports washing.
Didn't he say you can call it what you want?
Sorry?
But didn't he say you can call it what you want, but if it adds 1% to the GDP, then I don't care?
Yeah, so basically what I'm saying is, you know, there was a question that there's accusations of sports washing, and he replied, yeah, if it's going to add 1% to the country, then, you know, they'll continue doing
That's
that.
interesting. I took that to mean, well, that's what you call it, but we're doing this to diversify and
Yeah, I mean,
and grow the country.
I think looking at the transfer window, probably English clubs have to be a lot thankful for Saudis coming in this transfer window, getting rid of a lot of the deadwood that other teams won't not
Who are
even
you
have
calling
been,
Deadwood?
well, mentioning no names, but picking up players that others wouldn't have been able to afford or wouldn't have necessarily space in their squads for. And I think with the 2034 World Cup now being confirmed for Saudi Arabia as well, probably Mohamed Salah's a matter of when, not if. And you know, they had the 150 million bid rejected in the summer. They're going to come back probably a bit higher in the January transfer window, and if they still don't get it, then they push for next summer. But I think, as someone who is a Muslim footballer, the leading footballer of the Arab world, he'll be the crowning glory in their league, even more so than Cristiano Ronaldo.
Well, David, it's interesting actually you mentioned Ronaldo there, because there were some names, and I think a lot of people thought it was quite predictable that the likes of Ronaldo maybe were going there towards the end of his career. Benzema, although arguably he's still an incredible footballer, but then some of the younger players started to go, and the trajectory and the conversation around it changed, didn't it? Ruben Neves went, Gabri Vega went, and I know one that you heavily reported on and you spoke to actually was Jordan Henderson, and that was a transfer. You know, I probably shouldn't say this in public, but I'm a Liverpool fan, and that for us when I know we can talk about Manchester United in a bit if you want, and we can come on to it. But that was something, because Firmino went and everyone was disappointed from a footballing perspective, but Jordan Henderson went and the conversation around that completely changed and shifted because of the things that he'd spoken about, that he'd been an ally for, that he kind of represented in a lot of ways as captain of Liverpool Football Club, as someone who was very involved in a lot of different communities within the club. What was that like, speaking to him and getting that insight from the player himself on his motivations and on why he decided to make that move?
Well, it was something I was a bit surprised at. I thought he was going to go over there and kind of get so much criticism that you may as well just keep your head down. Why speak? Get on with it, earn your money, and create your life. So when I got the call, I was on the way back up from covering Arsenal against Man United on Sunday, I think the 3rd of September, and they said, you got to be at his house on Monday the 4th at 10:30 a.m. Suddenly you're like, goodness me, because it's not just a football.
In what country?
He was back here for the international break,
England,
so
okay.
yeah, and he lives not far from here in Cheshire, and I live in the region as well. So it was quite easy, but it was more of a head spin because it's not just a normal football interview. It was made clear to us he's only going to do one. He's going to speak. We don't want you to script any questions. You don't need to tell us, and we wouldn't do that anyway at The Athletic. There's not going to be we're not gonna ask you to show us the copy afterwards. It's just a clean-cut interview. Logistically, it wasn't easy in that short time frame to get it done on camera, and I think there was a bit more tentativeness on their side about how things may have been interpreted if it was on camera. But with hindsight, I think they probably would have liked to have done that, because the words came across quite harsh, actually, and sometimes when it's on television or radio or podcast, you can hear the emotion a bit more.
So you feel like sometimes when you were sat in the room, it had a different sense or maybe intent behind what he was saying to actually what was written on the paper or what it came out like, right?
Exactly, and I'll come on to explain that. So, first and foremost, was appreciative that he had allowed us to come and interview him on this when he could have picked any media or any journalists. He wanted my colleague Adam Crafton there, who's a member of the LGBTQ community and a top journalist in his own right, because he wanted to be scrutinized by a group of people that are most critical of his move. And he was an outspoken ally and advocate of the LGBTQ plus community, and probably the most vocal of any footballer, to be honest, which is why it shocked everybody so much. And so we had to interrogate him and press him as much as we could. I don't want any of you to accuse me of being like a fence sitter, but I do see both sides of this very clearly. Like, he does have his beliefs. I do think he supported the causes that he did for more than PR reasons. I think he truly believed it, because the extent that he went to would be a bit OTT, and you'd probably be found out if you were just doing it for the wrong reasons. But then came a really, I think, genuinely difficult situation for him, in that his club, Liverpool, didn't make him a reasonable offer to stay. He wasn't going to be part of their plans. He was the captain of Liverpool Football Club. And Klopp has kind of admitted it since. He sort of said, yeah, your role's going to be different. And Henderson, those who know him, and he admitted this in the interview, is not a good passenger. He wants to be playing. And a bit sad, really, he didn't have any offers of note from other clubs. I guess he could have waited longer into the window, and his agents or representatives could have gone out fishing. But there weren't people coming for him, whereas Saudi were coming for him, and they wanted to make him, one of their marquee signings. And the money was fantastic on offer. And he didn't say, I didn't go for the money. He said that it was important for them, the package to be right for him and his family. That obviously means the money's a factor. But what he was trying to explain was that it wasn't his sole reason for going. And I don't want to be a sympathizer for him, but I think that's fair. It was a factor. He didn't have the offers here, and then it brings you back to the sort of ethical point. He stands by his beliefs. Everybody in Saudi knows he believes that. Okay, he's not going around waving a flag, but he wasn't doing that here. And you don't, I don't go to any countries and disrespect their ways of living. And you could say, this is different to, I don't know, wearing a type of clothing. This is what you are born as. But he's made his choice, and it was quite tough being there in front of him and having to put these things to him in his kitchen, in his house, and he sort of, especially Adam, who was even firmer than me and speaks from a position of authority. And for some, there'll be no coming back, because they'll feel he's betrayed them and he stood up for something that he's now turned his back on. In their eyes, and others will say, fair play, you've gone for the money, and you should just admit it's all about the money. I just honestly think, I do think he's a pretty good guy. I do think it was probably quite hard in that moment to decide what to do. You've got the Saudi money, you've got Liverpool not wanting you want to sort your future out. I think I sensed he wanted to do it before his kids started school, and you might think that's an insignificant factor as a parent. I don't. It was it was one of the stories of recent times in the transfer market, and he's still playing for England. The way things are going, he'll probably be going to the Euros. So whether you like it or not, it hasn't worked out too badly for him. He won these trophies, European Cup, he won Premier League title, didn't have much more to accomplish. It is a bit sad for me seeing him playing in front of tiny crowds and nobody's really noticing the results or the play or the performances, but lay your bed, you've got to sleep in it.
Yeah, Sam, I think we touched on a couple of things actually in that brings me nicely on to my next point, because it's about players' motivations, isn't it, for going? And I think a lot of players that have gone to Saudi, and perhaps why people were initially annoyed at Jordan Henderson, is because he didn't just say, a large part of the reason I've done it is for the money and the financial motivations. But that's not just Saudi Arabia. A lot of that happens in England as well. A recent example for me is Caicedo and the fact he was going to Liverpool. Then he went to Chelsea. What are the players' motivations? How much does sentiment come into it? Because I know there was a lot of conversations about Chelsea being his boyhood club. What do you think the key motivations are for players when they're considering making a big, significant move?
Yeah, well, I thought this might come up. So I messaged a couple of friends of mine who did used to play to get their thoughts, and obviously, you know, we might think of like Caicedo and the big moves like that, but also the kind of the lower moves, maybe Championship Football League, even bottom half of the Premier League, or a player towards the end of their career, they're just looking for stability. Even a younger player a few years ago, I remember Mark Albrighton went to Leicester, I think, rather than staying at Villa, because they offered him a 2-year deal rather than one, and stability can be a big thing. But yeah, I got some messages back, and it said, so much, mate. Not every player wants a move, so it can be quite challenging and daunting. Depends on their age, their current club, the level of the club they're going to, the city, the culture, familiarity, the manager, schools for kids, money. Are they playing at their former club like Henderson, or are they being pushed out? The language, the league, is it a step up? Do you have a lot of options, or is it the only one you've got? Will you take your family? Because I know we're talking about transfers that the info was right but didn't happen. Kyle Walker in the summer, he was going to go to Bayern Munich and go on his own, and his family would stay here. So that's one thing that he had to consider. Did he come through the academy? That's apparently one thing. Are you settled? Where will you live in the new place? I said, does club rivalry ever come into it? And he said, depends on the player, but yeah, not everyone is comfortable going to a rival, but why would the club sell you there in the first place? I think it depends if the clubs are actually rivals or just in the same city, because obviously then if you live in London, you've got loads of rivals. But if you're staying in London, great for family. This guy used to play for City. He said, I'd never have played for United, but I'd have probably played for anybody else on earth. And he said, I didn't go to a certain club in one transfer window because I didn't like the manager, but I did go in the January window because they changed the manager. So that's interesting as well. Then I asked somebody else, and they said, in terms of position, you might want to, like if you're a striker, look and work out who's going to be giving you the opportunities, and if you're going to get the same types of opportunities that you get at your current club. They also said, rule number one for me is don't move for a manager unless it's Pep or he's stable. I think the idea of it being Pep is he's obviously a genius, but stable as well. Although you never really know when he's going to go. But I thought that was interesting as well. Don't move for a manager, because if they go, then you're up slack alley, really. And then they're playing style, adaptation, and then a lot of the stuff that was covered in the first one. So there is obviously a lot there that I suppose we wouldn't necessarily think about, but for them it's hugely important.
It's
and I suppose family as well. We take it for granted, don't
Exactly.
we? Even the Beckham documentary recently, we kind of followed Beckham's, obviously as much younger people as well. And then, you know, he goes to Madrid and that was one thing. And then he gets the move to LA, and all his family are like, oh, great, we're in LA. And he says, oh, I'm going to Milan. And Victoria Beckham's like, what are you talking about?
Spoiler alert.
Oh, yeah. and then he goes to Paris, and you just think, well, for us, you just think, well, yeah, they just go wherever. But you've got all these family elements as well, especially in their case, with like such a famous spouse as well.
Yeah,
loops back nicely to Saudi, because one intermediary that I was speaking to who was moving players on to Saudi, the Muslim aspect, moving to an Islamic country, was sort of as much of a motivation as the money that they were getting. So, you know, you could see Benzema, you know, influx of Muslim players that went over, but Benzema spoke about moving to a Muslim country. His mum was so happy he could go on pilgrimage regularly. So did Kante's. He spoke about it as well. So I think, go back to your question: is Saudi going to stay, or is it going to fizzle out like the Chinese Super League did? I think that sort of talent drain is going to continue over probably until the World Cup in 2034.
Yeah,
I agree.
I guess on the financial side of things as well, David, it's the gap between the top Premier League clubs now and the rest of the league, and how that is then filtering down into the Championship. And we've seen it really starkly this season, I think, with Luton, for example, coming up, breaking their transfer record fee 3 or 4 times in the summer, but never breaching anything near to what a club who has more financial power would even think about for a player. Do you think that gap is getting bigger between those top clubs with perhaps owners who have unlimited pots of money or just global fan bases, and the ones who are lower down the table and then also filtering into the lower leagues as well?
Yep, it's a reflection in society probably, the haves and have-nots, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and that's not right. The television deals in the Premier League are going through the roof. US deal has been extended until 2028 with NBC, who I do work with, and they're very good. And then they're going to be the new domestic rights are going to come on board soon, and they're going to get bigger. They flatlined for a bit, but they'll rise again. And the EFL rights. I mean, the EFL Championship is one of the most watched leagues in the world, and the rights have been going up, but obviously not at the same rate as the Premier League. Very close to finalising the new deal for football, which is going to see the Premier League distribute a significant amount of money down the pyramid, which many of us would say is long overdue, and it was really crystallised the sort of disparity with all the attempted European Super League breakaway and things like that. And so it is harsh, and like the teams that came up to the Premier League this season, I've never worked in or remember a season in the Premier League where the common conversation is there are 2 teams going straight back down, so there's only one team to play for, place to play for, and that's Sheffield United and Luton. And so who's going to take that third space? It's the best season to be rubbish because there's only one space up for grabs.
And the best season not to spend money as well, because I think a few clubs did that, didn't they? They thought we're going to gamble in the transfer window and not spend as much because there is only that probably one relegation spot.
Furthermore, people saying it's the best season for Everton to get a points deduction because they're probably rubbing their hands. But I mean, I'll defer to the guys because I'm not massive on my football finance knowledge, but it is definitely getting harder than ever. The revenue generators, especially towards the top of the Premier League, are in a different stratosphere. Even within the Premier League, they're in a different stratosphere. Like Manchester City and their operation as effectively a nation state, but their facilities, their processes, their structures, their people. I don't know if any of you have been down to the Etihad campus or even at the Etihad Stadium on a match day, and the hospitality and the tunnel club and the new dressing room and everything. They're in a different world. Tottenham have got an incredible stadium and training ground too. But even compared to some of the teams just around the top 4 or just below, they're ahead. So then you think down to the lower reaches of the Premier League and the Bournemouths and Lutons of this world, and even they financially are now bigger revenue generators than most teams in Europe, and certainly in the Championship. The thing is, there's still like capacity for shocks and upsets. It's still the competitive balance of English football is admired around the world, and it's I mean, Bayern Munich lost to a 3rd division team last night, so that was
Was Kane playing?
He wasn't, no. So he's not guilty on that one. But I think there's cause for major concern, and it's largely fueled by what we're talking about tonight, the transfers.
Yeah. Well, I was going to actually touch on that. Have I got lots of Manchester United fans in here? I'm sorry if I have. But what I was going to say, Sham, I'll come to you, is it's no guarantee of success, is it? When you do spend a lot of money, you look at, well, Manchester United arguably they spent a lot of money in the summer. Chelsea spent so much money. They're struggling a bit in the league this year. It doesn't guarantee success, does it, even when you're bringing in these players who are upwards of 100 million?
Exactly, and even those close to 100 million, such as Anthony, you know, a lot of question marks over him, and United are sort of stuck in this cycle of doing well under a manager for a season, and then leaks start happening, things start to unravel, they sack the manager, and then the next manager comes in, is left with players who have played for like 5 or 6 managers previously. So I think there are issues upstairs that need dealing with at the club, and probably the quicker the ownership situation gets resolved at United, hopefully the quicker the problems on the pitch get rectified as well.
Yeah, Sam, go on.
No, I've got nothing to add on United, honestly. Well, I've run out of things to say about United 5 or 6 years ago. Like you say, it's just the same cycle repeating itself. Again, it just comes down to structure, I suppose, and not just the people, not just the manager, but everyone being on the same page. And after the derby the other day, Guardiola was asked, you know, what's the difference between City and United? And he didn't explicitly acknowledge it, but he said what we've got at City is, he's obviously very well backed. The club is entirely built around him. He said, I know that they fully back me, because the players know that I rely on them. And when it's like that, it's all very strong. But I think you also need to have good people within that structure, because you can have everybody on the same page, but it's not necessarily the right page. You might have support at United over previous years for managers, but it's not guaranteed anything. It's just kind of stagnated further and further. So it is just, it's the usual United debate now. They haven't got a director of football. They should do this. They should do that kind of thing. But the point you make about it not being about money is it's just such an open goal, especially covering City, when the accusation against City or Guardiola in particular that it's all about money. You go, well, it just isn't, is it? Yeah. And just look at the league table and look at the results over the last few years. United in particular, but obviously Chelsea in the last 18 months. It's just as obvious as that. You don't really need to elaborate on it too much. It's there for all to see.
Sam, I'll come back to you actually, because working in the Manchester City space, there's been a lot of transfers recently that have been between rival clubs and between top 6 rivals in particular. Has that surprised you, that trajectory of that going upwards and becoming more common? And do you think it's set to continue? I
think it just ties into what we were saying before about the money and the financial disparity. Not so much within England, but Europe. I think Italy, they sold their TV rights for Serie A recently. I think they grouped them together to try and make it look more attractive and get more money, but they didn't. So they ended up selling a longer chunk of TV rights for less money. Obviously, Barca's problems are well known. Even Real Madrid are kind of hamstrung as well, because obviously Javier Tebas wants them to be sustainable, but at the cost of falling behind everybody else, because they would obviously still have huge amounts of money that they could spend. And it makes sense to try to be sustainable, but it's that idea of a wage cap. Like, would that be across the whole game? Because if they bring in a wage cap in the Premier League, then at some point that balance gets redressed. And I'm sure European clubs would be delighted for that, because they could finally start to get the upper hand on the Premier League. But none of those clubs have got the money to compete now. I remember a couple of years ago, in terms of City particularly, in fact, no, it was last season, when Arsenal were obviously at the top of the league and everyone was saying, oh, did they make a mistake selling Zinchenko and Jesus? You think, well, where else could they have gone? And then I looked around Europe, and I think there was only 5 transfers above 50 million euros, or above the fee that Jesus went to Arsenal for. I think one was Bayern Munich, a couple were Barca. But there's not loads of clubs spending that type of money. And I don't think those clubs would have wanted Gabriel Jesus necessarily, or Zinchenko. But Arsenal did, because of the link with Arteta. He knows exactly what they are. But the other thing is, Arsenal are one of the few clubs in Europe, and most of them are English, that can afford these players. So now this summer we've got Mason Mount going to Man United, Kovacic going to City. Obviously that was a cheaper deal. Cole Palmer going to Chelsea. It doesn't surprise me at all, because there's not really a market for these guys around Europe. But obviously other Premier League clubs, they can afford them. And like Raheem Sterling going to Chelsea, for instance, he would have loved to go to Spain, but there was no takers there. And then a move to London, he was absolutely delighted with that.
It's a common theme actually in the women's game, and I'm going to come on to this last thing before I open it up to you guys to ask some questions. But David, just to touch on the women's side of thing, because we can all see how much the growth of women's football is continuing exponentially with the World Cup, with the Euros, and particularly with England winning the Euros and how much that did for the women's game. But the transfer fees and the contracts have actually lagged a little bit further behind, and it's very common, and I'm not sure how much a lot of you guys know about the contracts in the women's game, but a lot of them are on 1 and 2 year deals, and the turnover and the lack of security that really exists in the women's game is high. And actually a lot of that came to the fore with Alessia Russo this year, the fact that she wasn't satisfied with what she was getting. She made the move from Manchester United to Arsenal. I know you reported on some of the women's transfers over the summer and maybe were positively surprised by the amount of traction they got. Do you feel like we are moving in the right direction in terms of transfers in the women's game, and it will match up to the growth of the game in general?
Yeah. Well, the first point, and it's fantastic, is that I think there's a bigger percentage scope for growth, percentage-wise, in the women's game than maybe in the men's game now. And broadcasters and, well, not across the board on the broadcasters, because they were struggling to find the correct rights deal for the Women's World Cup here in England, which was worrying. But sponsors, Barclays and others, they're getting involved. The Women's Super League, I think it's been bought, or it is being bought by a private company, the Women's Super League, and the running of it will be taken off the hands of the FA, because these people realise that there's something to be made here if you get it right. It's got a huge amount going for it in terms of the players getting better as athletes, as technical performers, the sort of enjoyment that the crowds are taking from it. So the Euros final was amazing. 1 year after Wembley had been destroyed by England fans, basically rioting, drink, drugs, violence. One of the darkest days in modern English football history, I'd say. It was horrific. It was a day of pure celebration. People felt comfortable to walk down Wembley Way and into the stadium as families. It was really nice, a bit of personal insight on that Euros victory for England at Wembley. I've got 2 boys who are 9 and 7, so they are not polluted by any stereotypes or prejudices in the world, thank goodness, and long may it continue. But they don't like the opposition team to who I support, but apart from that. We were watching the Euros final at home, and England won it, of course, and I think when Chloe Kelly's goal went in and full-time whistle blew, they went around the house screaming and celebrating, these 2 boys, who I just presumed were only into men's football, and they fill out the Premier League sticker book and have shirts and go to primary school where there'll be other boys talking about football, and girls, but less so. And they celebrated it in a way that I've not seen them celebrate men's football, and I absolutely loved it. And it sort of said to me, and my wife was there as well, and she was getting all emotional, and she hates men's football. And it was just that small microcosm that sort of said to me, this game could explode, and it is already in a way, but there's so much more for it to go. There's still things that you don't like to see. The Ireland match last night, which was played in torrential rain, like biblical rain, and if it was a men's game, it probably wouldn't have even started. It was like a sign of disrespect in my eyes, and a few people on social media have picked up on it today, sort of inequalities in treatment. One of my concerns about the rise in ACL injuries among women's players, which has been rampant as well. It ravaged England's World Cup squad and many of the WSL sides. And there'll be many reasons for the ACL injuries, whether it be genetics and whatever. But I think perhaps the physio and medical care on the women's side, maybe because of the money involved, is not as good as it is on the men's side. And there's no real excuse for that, because the clubs, mainly men led by men's clubs, could deploy more money to it. But just specifically on the transfers, because I've gone off on one of my characteristic tangents, I reported on Russo being the subject of a world record bid from Arsenal on deadline day in January, And I just thought it was, I was quite proud that I did a women's football story, but I didn't think it was going to take off, and it went wild. I think to this day, when I've looked at the stats on Twitter, it was over 3,000 or 4,000 retweets and thousands of likes, and the page impressions was over 1 million. And that said to me, post-Euros, the enthusiasm that I sort of articulated through my kids, the scenes in the crowds, is that it's there for the taking. It really is. You're now seeing it with Mary Earps, who's on that lovely sort of mural over there. She is, the subject also of interest from Arsenal. And some of these players are becoming household names. Fran Kirby made her comeback in the England-Belgium game the other night, and I heard people talking about it. It's penetrating sort of mainstream television, radio coverage, podcasts, newspapers, when it would have been a sort of drop in the ocean. The contractual situation you mentioned needs to improve. We're seeing agents now, many agents working in women's football and specialising and seeing it as opportunities to make money, but also to make an impact. And it's really nice. And you used to hear about it in like the USA and Sweden, Germany a little bit, but now women's football here is here to stay, and I think it's going to sort of catapult.
It's a nice point for us to end on then. I'm going to open it up to you guys in the room. I think it's easiest if you just put your hand up, and we've got a microphone, so we will come over. I'll just spot you if you put your hand up. We've got one at the front already. Amazing. Thank you.
Hiya, thank you very much for the experience and for discussion. I had a different question, but you just touched upon, David, you touched upon the women's football and Alicia Russo having more than 1 million views on your Twitter. And
yeah.
I used to do something with Newcastle women who just promoted from 4th tier to 3rd, and the first announcement we did in summer had more than 800,000 views on Twitter. So what do you think will be catalysator for that growing, that transfer business growing and the interest in that growing within the game?
Well, one thing that is definitely going to grow it, I know a few of the female players. A few of the girls live near me, and maybe, where are we now, 2023, so about 10 years ago, and even going back further. So 9-10 years ago, I played locally on like five-a-side evenings, and there were a couple of girls who were at like Everton, and Man United was just starting up then, I think, Man City, and they were kind of trying to find a game with us, like unfit men of sort of getting towards middle age. And I'm like, they should be in academies and things. And prior to that, I played a game with journalists when I used to work down in London against Arsenal women, who had like Kelly Smith and Rachel Yankee and Anita Asante, and they ran us off the park like in terms of their fitness, and they were quite nimble with technique, but if you sort of put a shoulder in, you'd win the ball back. They beat us 10-2, but still those 2 goals we sort of felt proud by. Now they're elite sporting specimens. They wouldn't be seen unless they fancy coming down for a game with us on the AstroTurf, because they've got much better facilities. They're being paid better. Millie Turner I know quite well at Manchester United, and you know she's an elite athlete, like many of the girls are, and so as the level of athlete rises, and hopefully the pay does accordingly as well, because clubs are dedicating more of their revenues towards the women's teams. That's why you're seeing more agents get involved, and although people don't like agents in large part, they're there to negotiate the best deals for their clients, and so them coming into the women's game has an upside as well, because if these girls are going to get more money, then it will impact the wider sphere. The inspiration that's coming from like the Euros final, you're seeing platoons of girls playing now. You really are. So there's like my kids' school at a certain age, they don't have a boys' football team. They have to play outside on a weekend, like an outside club, whereas the school has a girls' team at that age, which really surprised and pleased me recently when I found that out. And they're good. Like at one of my son's birthday parties recently, some of the girls from the class came along. They were just as good as the boys. And so this is all going to filter through if the Football Association, who do really seem to have their heads screwed on, there will always be moments of misogyny and sexism and unequal treatment that are going to get picked up on, and rightly so. But in and amongst it all is like rampant progress. And Sue Campbell, who was leading the way for the FA, and a number of others involved too. So naturally, like with the men's side, the money will increase, the facilities, the stadiums, the quality of pitches, the quality of medical care, and that's only going to then elevate the transfer market, as you say, the eyeballs, the more television and media coverage from companies like ours, where there's a real responsibility, I feel, not just to focus on the big matches, but we've got women's football correspondents at The Athletic, the BBC have got it too, Sky have dedicated loads more time than they did ever before, ITV, and broadcaster I know very well, Laura Woods, is leading the coverage of that now. And so I just think there's patience required, there's things that are going to be slow, but they've got a lot of benefits that the men's game don't have, like pleasant match day experiences. Not like your feet sticking to the ground as you walk through concourses and things like that. And maybe there are certain areas where the men's game can learn from. But back to the point I made at the start, I do think there's scope for bigger growth in the women's game percentage-wise than there is in the men's, and that's thoroughly exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Do you think you'll be like youth free or that I usually do anything on transfer news, but you would send people covering those in more supply. You covered Alicia Roos, but you would be more interested in that, or it would be just new journalists coming on stage, maybe from female population, and new young males?
It's a real mix, isn't there, I think?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I don't know what you think, Harriet, but there are quite a few journalists specialising in women's football coverage now.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think it's a real mix, and I think you'll get a lot more new and exciting voices who are just dedicated to reporting on the women's game, and that would never have happened previously. But there's also people like me. I came into football journalism through the men's game, but women's football is a huge passion of mine now, and reporting more on that side of things is huge. But I think, yeah, you'll see both sides of it. Established journalists who want to dedicate more time on that and feel like it's got a huge potential for growth in all areas, including on the media. And you mentioned our responsibility. We all, as people work in the media, have that responsibility. But also, I think it opens up a huge platform for new, exciting young journalists in the women's game only to feel like that could be a pathway, because I think when I started working in it, I didn't think working solely in the women's game was a viable pathway to work in the industry full time, and now it definitely is. So yeah, and also support your local grassroots teams, because that's where it all starts and where the funding really needs to happen, because if without the grassroots team no one trickles up, and you won't get the incredible level of talent in the WSL at the higher level, because that's why we have it in the Premier League, because so many boys grow up playing football, so support the girls growing up playing football as well.
For sure. Just quickly on that, I'm not as ethical as you in terms of we've got a duty. I said we do have a duty, and our companies have a duty, but I've only done those stories on merit. I haven't said, I'd like to do a women's story now. So I did Katie McCabe's new contract at Arsenal recently, and again, that really took off when I posted the tweet and the Instagram story, because she's a top player at club and international level. I'm doing these because, they're valid stories. There are loads of, sometimes I do stories or get offered stories at, lower league men's level, League 2, League 1 championship, or a different country, and I'm almost like, yeah, I'll do them because I treat them all with the same respect. But you notice they don't really do anything, a lower league contract or transfer in terms of traction, and the women's really does. So I think, to answer your question specifically, organically we will do more. We'll have to. It'll be part of the game that develops. But at the same time, it's giving a platform and brilliant license for Tom Gary is the correspondent for women's football at the Daily Telegraph and used to be with us on the BBC Sport website. You got like Molly at the Guardian,
Emma Sanders at the BBC.
Emma's doing amazing. You've got Susie Rack at the Guardian. Well, I'm not sure if I got all the papers right. Oh, Molly's at the Times, and then you know, a great commentator like Peen Moulenstein, who's flying, a good friend of mine, and I mean she's doing the men's game as well, like Harriet's done. But it's just becoming. What I'm trying to say here is it's becoming like commonplace, and women, some of whom started. You started on the men's side. Some have started on the women's side and are going the other way.
Yeah. And
so it's just going to become, and thankfully so, I think it's going to become part of the fabric.
Do we have time for any more questions?
Oh,
yeah?
sorry.
Yeah.
Ask some more to the guys.
Yeah, go for it.
I feel terrible.
Sorry, not to go to a slightly more trivial topic, but I was wondering about relationships that you have with certain clubs, because I imagine dealing with different clubs is a different experience. Obviously not naming any specific clubs that are more difficult than others, but how's your sort of relationship with those clubs sort of developed, and are there certain ones where you think, oh, I'm not getting anything out of them, or you know, ones that they're a little bit more sort of talked? I know obviously Sam, I imagine you have a good relationship with City, but no, you don't.
Not particularly. It's quite funny because whenever we go out for dinners with the Athletic, it's like the old grass isn't always greener, because we're always complaining about the press officers that we deal with the most. Yeah. Like if you're different club correspondents.
We're a fun crowd at dinner parties.
Yeah, it's as boring as it sounds. But you do always hear, because everyone's got horror stories, press officers that you have to deal with. I mentioned that Nathan Ake Bournemouth one earlier, where they just lie to you, or don't know. But at least if they don't know, you'd like to think there'd be an apology. Mm. But then you hear other experiences and just think it's just like it everywhere. But then it just comes down to playing the game, doesn't it? Really. You're in different, but I'm not particularly good at that, and that's why I don't necessarily have a great relationship with everyone at City, because there's only so many times you can be lied to before you kind of take issue with it. But most people don't take issue with it. Most people play the game. I speak to colleagues who cover City and other clubs around who I know they've got the same kind of issues, or sometimes there's issues, but they will handle it better, and therefore the relationships are better. I think David's fantastic at managing those relationships as well, because it is difficult, isn't it? Because you do get clubs, they will, like you mentioned earlier on, they'll try and tell you not to do a particular story. And certainly sometimes you're lucky enough to know that you are right and they're wrong, but you've just got to manage that.
Even sporting organisations,
yes,
they'll get in touch. If you speak to them saying, look, I've got this story, can I go with it? Can you give us some guidance? As we said at the start, trust your sources, don't you? And they have to be robust in both of our organisations that we work at. You'll get a call from someone going, I won't go with it just yet, but I'll give you a nudge when you can. But like you said, trust your instincts and trust your sources. But to answer the question, I do a lot of Everton and Burnley and have good relationships with both clubs. But in terms of press conferences, I dread going to Everton, because speaking with Sean Dyche just fills me with fear, because you don't know what you're going to get with him. And it's usually short shrift to your answers, and you're scrambling, you're shaking in your seat, thinking of what to ask next, and you've got all the journalists looking at you, going, "Oh yeah, he's on to you now, isn't he?" So Everton's press conferences are difficult to deal with, whereas Burnley is brilliant because Vincent Kompany is so much more relaxed, and whatever you ask him, he's going to give you a good answer. He's going to possibly give you a line news line that to work on as well.
I think we might have to call it there, unless there's maybe one. If you can answer in 60 seconds, there's maybe time for one more.
We can do a couple of quick fire ones.
Yeah,
I
quick fire
believe in
questions.
us. I believe
All
in
the
us.
hands are up now. Come on.
Yeah, you choose. I feel bad choosing.
I'll make it as quick as possible. Why do certain clubs wait until almost the last day of the transfer section to put a bid in? They must have done the due diligence months in advance. They know they're not going to get the player that much cheaper, so why wait until right at the end?
These rapid fire questions, which I could speak about for about 5 hours. One, incompetence, and two, trying to cut a deal. They think that when push comes to shove at the end, Arsene Wenger used to think this, that the price will come down, and as Man United are finding now, it tends to go up.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a woman behind in the row behind. Do you have someone else? Yeah, go give it to whoever you want.
Hello. Lovely to meet all you guys. Thanks for coming out. It's a quick one around writing and beginning your journey as a journalist and writing in football. It's so saturated now. So what advice would you give for someone starting out in terms of standing out and also building a following and a fan base?
It's tough because I think, and obviously I can only speak personally, but when I started out a goal really, and I wanted to make it. I don't know. I just wanted to do it slightly differently because obviously a lot of the newspaper reports would be the same, the match reports would be the same. But what I was able to do, and it sounds stupid now because it's more common, but you could just focus on one specific. You'll laugh because you could focus on one specific topic about a game and go in depth on that. And that's what I wanted to do when I was at goal, to try and maybe do things differently. But that's why I say it's difficult now, because that's basically the Athletics' entire model. So now everybody's doing that. And I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm a trailblazer, but that's what I wanted to do initially. But now that's more common. So I'm not sure what you would do to stand out, because even the kind of the less mainstream tactical YouTubers or whatever, there's loads of those, and they're all really good. So it is difficult.
Yeah, a couple of things. I was going to say finding your niche, which is something obviously all you guys have done really well in different areas. And I guess also use like smaller media outlets, because I think a lot of people look at people who are working at these really big organizations and like, oh, how do I get to where they are? And actually you'll find that they wrote for loads of places where no one read their work maybe even once, and they just had to develop their portfolio that way. I started in fan media. I'll always be a huge advocate of fan media. I think it's a really great way for people to find their voice and work in media for the first time before maybe moving on to bigger things. But I think, yeah, if you support a team, like finding different websites, podcasts, things that are in and around that team and getting involved in things that way, and then hoping that they'll kind of lead on to different things. But finding your voice, don't try and... I think it's always good to have people you look up to and think, I really want to be like them. Like, I love Kelly Cates and I'll always look up to her as someone I want to be like, but I think also finding your own voice and making sure that you're unique and thinking like, what can I bring that's different to what everyone else is offering? Because there will be something. You'll always have a different perspective and a unique perspective. But yeah, my biggest piece of advice would really just be to find those little companies and those websites and just reach out and say, can I maybe write for you? Can I come in for a day? Can I do these things? Because it's those little connections that you might go in one day to I don't know, there's loads around Liverpool. I started working for the Anfield Wrap and then went in one day and met someone from LFC TV, went in one day and met someone from Sky, and it's just building those little connections, but starting in the smaller places and finding those little niches in those areas is really key.
Yeah. I did years of snooker and rugby league. You used to do F1, didn't you?
Yeah.
And so it's not as massive as football.
I did British basketball and rugby league and stuff like that at the BBC
which
too.
give you the confidence to put your hands up in press conferences, develop your writing style, do one-on-one interviews, because sports like rugby league and snooker give you great access. Yeah. I'm sitting next to Ronnie O'Sullivan before he's going out for a world championship match. Mm-hmm. Is that going to happen in football? Where players coming out to warm up and then comes and sits next to you in the press box type of thing. So yeah, you have to find some, as you said, a niche where you feel comfortable, and then I sort of progressed to doing just Premier League football now.
And try not to say no as well. I mean, it's difficult because there are companies who will try and exploit young writers and unpaid opportunities. But if there is an opportunity for you, maybe you have to go to a different end of the country to do an interview, just do it. Because like you were saying, the conversations you'll have from that will often lead to something else.
Don't be a sheep. Like, you've got to be brave and courageous to stand out from the crowd and try and do something different that sets you apart. And what Sham says there, cutting your teeth, even if it's in something that you don't intend to end up in. I did tons of tennis as well for the BBC, and you'd go and cover Davis Cup matches in Scotland where you're the only journalist. And that might sound like lonely, but actually you get the best access in the world, and then you can transfer those skills, whether it be from fan media into mainstream media. And linking all three of them together, what Sam just said about never saying no, you'd be staggered at the amount of people that do say no, or duck out of something, or don't pick their phone up when they see a certain editor calling, or make up an excuse. And it might get you out of doing something that's quite nerve-wracking, but you won't progress in your career. And those that put their hand up and take yourself outside of your comfort zone and do those awkward things, you gain experiences, and you can put things down on your CV, and you can say to editors when they're asking you, what have you done that's a bit different? Well, I went and did this, and it will be worth its weight in gold.
I feel like we could go on forever, but I think I am being told I have to wrap up now. But thank you so much, everyone. It's a really interesting conversation. Thank you to all of you guys on the panel for being here and getting stuck into some topics that are really interesting, some quite difficult. I want to ask you, did you always want to be the transfer guy? Was that always the plan? I am stopping, I promise. You're a one-word answer. Was that always the plan? I was really interested. I was meant to ask you during the discussion.
No, and it's not a one-word answer, but it's the quickest answer of the night for me. A lot of it is luck and timing, and so I felt I wanted to be newsy. And as I was coming through as a young journalist, the transfer market was starting. So that's why you need to go to stuff and put yourself in the mix for stuff, because you might find your luck. It's like meeting a partner or something.
Wow, go into motivational speaking. I think that's your next career move, isn't it? Thank you, everyone. I really hope you've enjoyed that. As we've already mentioned, there is a lot of really good events coming up throughout this Football Writing Festival, so do get involved and maybe come down tomorrow night. Is there still tickets available for that? Handful, yeah, so maybe you can get involved in that as well. But thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And yeah, see you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.